Tonight, the numbers drop again, but the Premier wants to extend the state of emergency.
We've got to protect public health. There can be no economic rebuilding. There can be very little else until we get this public health problem fixed.
Also tonight, recriminations and a resignation as branch-stacking allegations hit the Victorian Liberal Party. Hundreds of homes destroyed as fires rage across California. And waddling on the web, Phillip Island's famous penguin parade moves online. Good evening, Tamara Oudyn with ABC News. The Premier Daniel Andrews will ask Parliament to extend state of emergency powers for up to 12 months. We had our lowest daily case numbers in almost 2 months today, 116. But with another 15 COVID deaths, the government says the virus is too dangerous and that it needs the option of emergency lockdown powers long term. Iskander Razak reports.
88-year-old Taz Mihalakopoulos is one of the latest Victorians to die of COVID-19.
Dad was a lot of fun and he was extremely fearless and passionate.
15 Victorians died overnight, all were in aged care.
In my opinion, it comes down to the infection control. I think that can be managed better. I think it's reactive. I think they wait and see for things to go wrong.
The virus continues to spread through some workplaces, and that's one of the reasons Daniel Andrews wants the power to extend the state of emergency for up to 12 months.
We've got to protect public health. There can be no economic rebuilding. There can be very little else until we get this public health problem fixed.
The state of emergency allows officials to detain people, stop mass gatherings and impose restrictions on business to protect public health. The Premier's power to extend it expires in just a few weeks. Continuing beyond September 13th requires parliamentary approval.
The Liberals and Nationals will be opposing this power grab with everything we've got. Victorians don't deserve to be locked up in their homes for another 12 months.
I'm on the working party that's working out how Parliament sits next week, and we haven't even decided whether Parliament is going to sit next week.
The Greens support the Chief Health Officer being able to do his work for as long as is needed.
Victoria still has more than 3,500 cases. Almost half of those are people in aged care, and more than 400 health workers are currently infected. The state recorded 116 new cases today, the lowest since the beginning of last month. The Premier says it proves emergency powers are working and the government needs the option to use them in the future.
If we didn't have that, the chances of the Chief Health Officer recommending to me that we can open up, zero. Like, no way.
The government is worried about lockdown fatigue. 197 fines were issued in the past 24 hours, several for people travelling on trains after curfew. 2 women caught at Dandenong train station told police they knew it was wrong, but they did it anyway. Melbourne is in its 4th week of a stage 4 lockdown, and to keep the public on side, the government is promising more information on outbreaks and high-risk areas will be posted on the health website for all to see. Iskander Razak, ABC News, Melbourne.
A security guard in Melbourne's hotel quarantine program has told an inquiry he worked as a food delivery driver hours after taking a COVID test. He's also told a hearing that PPE protocols inside the hotels were so lax, he was asked to reuse masks. A hotel guest has also spoken out, saying his 14 days in the program left him feeling humiliated. Here's Elias Kluwer.
Professional fighter Khan Offley is used to rolling with the punches. But 2 weeks quarantined inside this hotel pushed him to his limits.
I would feel embarrassed to be able to call and be like, hey, can I get another meal, or can I get another piece of bread roll?
Mr. Offley told the inquiry he was sometimes given just 1 meal a day, and after several days he was told the food wasn't even halal, despite him specifying his dietary requirements. It wasn't the only mix-up. For 10 days, Mr. Offley wasn't on the books, meaning staff didn't know he was staying there.
It was my partner that had answered the call, and she said, no, we don't have any symptoms. And then the lady said, what do you mean by we? I guess, yeah, for the whole 10 days, I wasn't actually in the system.
But it was a security guard that gave today's most damning evidence. He worked for 6 weeks at the Marriott, the Novotel and Ridges, while also working at a warehouse and as a food delivery driver. He says at Ridges, PPE was dangerously scarce.
Use the one set of masks and gloves for your whole shift, And when you come off the floor, just put them in your pocket.
Yeah.
Were you given any further instructions about where you should be when you put them in your pocket?
He told me, like, just don't do it. Just don't put your mask and gloves in the pocket in front of the security camera.
While working at the Ridges Hotel, the security guard became sick and developed COVID-19 symptoms. But he stayed at work for another 2 to 3 hours. He then got tested, but just hours after that, while waiting for his test results, he made a few food deliveries. He then tested positive to coronavirus.
Why did you do that?
I felt pretty good and I was getting bored at my house.
The inquiry will resume on Thursday. Elias Kluwer, ABC News, Melbourne.
A security guard who worked at a quarantine hotel in Sydney has been fined twice for breaching public health orders. After being tested for coronavirus, he went to a shopping centre and then a customer service centre despite being told to self-isolate. The following day, his result came back positive.
Absolutely disappointed. You know, you have people working in high-risk locations that have induction processes and every day are reminded about the seriousness of this.
3 new cases have been recorded in New South Wales. 2 are returned travellers in hotel quarantine. Well, we're seeing a large drop in cases here in Victoria. The number of people dying is still a concern. Here's our analyst, Casey Briggs.
From as high as 700 a day at the start of the month to just 116 cases today. Things are trending down very well at the moment in Victoria in almost all settings. But there are 2 groups where they're not, and together they're making up a large share of the infections we're still seeing. We might be now seeing an extinguishing of transmission through the community at large, while risky settings continue to battle outbreaks. This strong downward slope that we're seeing across the state is not being replicated as strongly among healthcare workers. 51 more infections were reported today. And in aged care, we're still seeing more than 30 cases amongst residents of nursing homes on average each day. The number of active infections in aged care residents is still climbing, and we've now seen around 330 deaths, and there are still more than 1,100 active infections. This is probably why we're not seeing big falls in the numbers of people dying nationally at the moment. New South Wales has gone a long time now without a new cluster rearing its head, and the 7-day average of locally acquired cases has dropped below 4. That's the lowest it's been since mid-July. The big question remains how much of this virus is still lurking in Sydney, particularly the southwest and west of the city. And one new case in Brisbane today takes the Brisbane Youth Detention Centre cluster to 10. That includes workers and close contacts of workers, but we haven't yet seen any tertiary cases. That is, the close contacts of those close contacts being infected.
Scott Morrison and his beleaguered aged care minister have both apologised to Parliament for failings connected to coronavirus outbreaks in nursing homes. Their contrition came on a historic day in Parliament, the first sitting to let MPs and senators ask questions and enter debates via video link. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
Have a good day.
A cross-party political cover-up comes to Canberra. Not mandatory, but masks very much in mode, at least for those who aren't working from home.
The House has been adapting to the changing circumstances, as have all Australians.
In the House, Labor's deputy leader, the first to ask a question COVID style.
How many more aged care residents have to die before the Prime Minister accepts full responsibility?
335 aged care residents have died of COVID-19 in federally funded, federally regulated homes, most of them in Victoria.
Again, I offer my apologies to the residents and families of those affected in those facilities. It was not good enough.
The aged care minister also offering contrition for the loss of life, as well as not being on top of his brief when he fronted a parliamentary committee last week.
I should have had the data on Friday, and I apologise for not having done that. And I take full responsibility for not having that information available to me at the time.
A royal commission has been poring over the weaknesses of the system. Its interim conclusion, that the system's failing and needs fundamental reform.
The failings that they are dealing with go back over many, many years, Mr.
The Prime Minister saying the government won't wait for the final report to respond.
In this year's budget, and if need be, Mr. Speaker, the mid-year statement as well.
In other words, we can expect a lot more money being directed at aged care from October in boosting the workforce, telehealth and streamlining intervention when things go wrong. For many, this can't come soon enough. With about 1,400 aged care residents infected, there'll be many more who'll perish. And as the death toll rises, the clamour for reform's only going to get louder. Victorians endured 2 weeks of quarantine to make it into Parliament, but it wasn't an entirely cleansing experience for one.
Marcus is an important piece of the team.
Assistant Treasurer Michael Sukar's links with one-time Victorian Liberal factional warlord Marcus Bastian has got Labor demanding answers.
It's a test for Scott Morrison to stamp out the corruption in the Victorian branch.
The Nine networks suggested Mr Sukar had once worked with Mr Bastian on plots to target moderate Liberals and even hired his wife as a staffer.
They've referred those matters to the Department of Finance for review, and that's the appropriate thing to do.
Marcus Bastian's now quit the party. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
And for more on the branch stacking scandal hitting the Victorian Liberals, I'm joined by state political reporter Richard Willingham. So, Rich, how deep do these allegations go in the Liberal Party?
Good evening, Tam. That's one of the big questions, just about how many memberships may be considered illegitimate because they were brought in as part of this branch stacking, and also how many senior figures, potentially MPs, have been touched by this, given that Marcus Bastian has been a prominent figure of the party for some time. In the past, he's had close alliances with people, including the party president at the time, Michael Kroger. Now, there's also questions about the involvement of Kevin Andrews, the veteran MP for Menzies. Now, Mr Andrews' office has been alleged to be used, the staff there, taxpayer-funded staff, rather than doing electorate work, they were doing factional work for Mr Bastian's grouping. Now, Mr Andrews says he was unaware of this and has referred that away. There's also revelations last night that Marcus Bastian and another senior young Liberal figure were exchanging text messages that were both racist and misogynistic. Mr Bastian has apologised for that. And then there was the mention of secret recordings involving Michael Sukkar, the federal minister, in which he's discussing targeting state Liberal MPs considered to be too moderate and targeting their pre-selection. And that's one issue that's rankled quite a few people in the Liberal Party, none other than opposition leader Michael O'Brien.
The idea that any federal MP would seek to engage or influence a state pre-selection. That's not on. That is absolutely not on. Victorian state MPs, we will deal with our own pre-selection matters, just as federal MPs should deal with their pre-selection matters.
These branch stacking activities have become activities of insurgency, where it's a move to actually take over, to actually run the whole show, and in the process intimidate other people to the extent that they are no longer comfortable and they leave the organisation. And that's just completely and utterly wrong.
So, Rich, what are the next steps here?
Well, both Mr Sukkar and Mr Andrews have referred off issues regarding their staff, electorate office staff, to the Department of Finance Secretary in Canberra for an independent review. Tonight there's a special meeting of the State Liberal Party's Administration Committee, and they're going to, among the agenda is the need to bring in an external fraud investigator to work out what's going on with the actual memberships, to check out who's legitimate, who's not. Just last week, the State Director, Sam McQuestion, did reveal that an audit of memberships had found some irregularities, including memberships being paid for other people, which is against rules and usually a sign of branch stacking. Now, this has been simmering tensions inside the Victorian Liberals for years. Factional rivalries have been running red hot, and some people are describing today's revelations, last night's revelations, as part of a factional hit and warning there will be retaliation. So I think tomorrow we can expect to see plenty more internal biffo from the Victorian Liberal Party.
Richard Willingham, thank you. A Christchurch court has heard chilling details of the attacks on 2 mosques last year as the sentencing hearing for the Australian terrorist begins. In emotional scenes, survivors and victims' families told of the devastating impact, but some spoke of forgiveness too. Despite COVID restrictions, 29-year-old Brenton Tarrant was flown into Christchurch from a maximum security prison in Auckland. Barbara Miller reports, and a warning many viewers will find this story confronting.
back in Christchurch to face his victims. This their moment to tell the defendant about the immense pain he inflicted.
Ada is gone, but never forgotten. He will always be the light of our lives, and we will live his legacy every day.
But they said they were stronger than him.
You thought you can break us. You failed miserably.
Several directly addressed the defendant.
We are not broken. We are come more united. From just you make that, and thank you for that.
And then this from a mother who had told the court how she couldn't sleep, work or concentrate. So deep was her grief at the loss of her son, 35-year-old Hussein Alomari.
I decided to forgive you, Mr. Tarrant, because I don't have hate. I don't have revenge.
The court heard about the detailed planning that the gunman had put into the attacks, including leaving his home in Dunedin to drive to Christchurch for a reconnaissance mission on January the 8th last year. The defendant parked directly across from the mosque, where he launched a drone to scope out the building. He took detailed notes of his findings as he honed his plan.
The planned time for entry was to ensure the maximum number of worshippers would be present. The defendant analysed the mosque layouts to determine likely exit routes fleeing worshippers might utilise.
The description of the attacks read to the court was chilling. The gunman methodically went about the killings, firing on anyone who showed signs of life repeatedly at close range, including at a 3-year-old boy clinging to his father's legs, the youngest of the 51 people killed. Brenton Tarrant told police he was motivated by a desire to intimidate and kill Muslims and non-Europeans, describing them as invaders. The court also heard that when he was arrested, the defendant was on his way to a third mosque, and afterwards he told police he would have liked to kill even more people and burn down all 3 places of worship. Life without parole is the maximum sentence in New Zealand. Families will be satisfied with nothing less. Barbara Miller, ABC News.
At least 7 people have been killed as dozens of bushfires burn across northern California. 2 of the blazes are among the largest in California's recorded history and have destroyed hundreds of homes. Authorities are struggling to find enough firefighting resources and have asked Canada and Australia to help. Chief Foreign Correspondent Philip Williams reports.
It's been the perfect firestorm. High winds, temperatures to match, and a bone-dry fuel load. Most of the fires were ignited by thousands of lightning strikes. Tens of thousands have been evacuated from the paths of a rampaging beast that simply can't be controlled. Many, like Naomi Sakambi, fear they have lost everything.
The ground is still hot, so you have to be patient. It's the worst waiting game possible.
The fires have moved so fast, they've overwhelmed the 13,000 firefighters, their lives in extreme danger.
All right, guys, I'm going to get you out of here, okay? All right.
Just north of San Francisco, firefighters need urgent rescue.
Drive straight up.
The helicopter arrives just in time, flames only 60 metres away.
See how close it is, guys? Thank you for coming.
The Governor of California is calling for help from some old friends who understand the urgent threat.
The support we provided in turn of some of the best wildfire firefighters in the world from Australia. We also have requests out for that talent as well.
Our government is considering that request. American firefighters came to the rescue in our recent summer of need.
Copy, shutting down.
With more lightning strikes predicted, the situation may deteriorate even further. More lives, more homes at risk, and no relief in sight. President Trump has declared a major disaster, but he's also added some advice, telling Californians they have to clean their forests better, get rid of the leaves and the broken branches. Not necessarily the sort of advice that the firefighters want to hear right now. Philip Williams, ABC News, Washington.
Still to come this hour, a whistleblower speaks out about the scandal-plagued insurer iCare.
We were sitting in boardrooms overlooking the harbour when they were cutting off people from getting their workers' compensation payments.
Vulnerable workers seem to be undercompensated or not compensated at all.
Plus, Dr Norman Swan on the Australian coronavirus vaccine that's showing promise. That's coming up.
A new study has found unborn babies exposed to pollution from the Hazelwood coal mine fire in 2014 were more likely to develop respiratory illnesses later in life. The regional town of Morwell was smothered in smoke for 6 weeks when a bushfire spread into the open-cut mine. Researchers have monitored the health of 300 Latrobe Valley children and found babies who were in utero during the fire were more likely to develop coughs, colds and chest infections as toddlers.
It was unexpected that the signal was the strongest in the children who were in utero at the time. We would have expected to see an effect on the children who were already born, so that was a surprising result.
The study found the protection of pregnant women and babies should be central to any public health response to severe smoke events. AMP is once again embroiled in turmoil, this time over its handling of a series of sexual harassment complaints. The company's chairman and another director have resigned after a shareholder revolt, but the alleged perpetrator of the harassment remains in a senior role.
2 years after losing 5 directors from the Banking Royal Commission, board upheaval is happening again as AMP's culture continues to be exposed.
It's sending a really strong and clear message that AMP is not backing their own employees or the woman involved.
The furore centres around revelations that this man, Bo Pahari, was promoted to run AMP's most profitable division, despite being docked $500,000 in pay after an allegation of sexual harassment was made by one of his subordinates. That prompted a shareholder revolt, resulting in Chairman David Murray, as well as Mr Pahari's immediate boss, former Treasury Secretary John Fraser, both quitting the AMP board. Mr Pahari stays, though, back at a previous level, still earning millions of dollars a year.
What people have heard is very much we place far more emphasis on the people who generate profits or control the generation of profits.
While there's any suggestion of trivialising or misleading investors and others, she will be, I think, vigilant about making sure the record is corrected.
Also in the spotlight is Chief Executive Francesco Di Ferrari, who earlier this month said he wanted to improve the culture at AMP. However, by keeping a man with such a big black mark against him in a very senior position, there are those who believe Mr Di Ferrari has already failed.
I think he needs to make a very decisive action now or step down himself.
In a statement late today, AMP said the complaint was dealt with appropriately and Mr Pahari was penalised accordingly. Andrew Robertson, ABC News.
The local share market moved higher today, while the Australian dollar remained roughly steady. Here's Alan Kohler.
But first, a graph of AMP's share price since it demutualised and listed on the ASX in 1998 versus the All Ordinaries Index. AMP down 90%, All Ords up 136%. And perhaps unsurprisingly, during that time, AMP has seen no less than 15 CEO and board sackings and early departures to spend more time with families. On the share market today, the All Ordinaries hit 6,300, up 0.5%, and it was another buy now, pay later spree, with punters buying now and hoping not to pay later. Afterpay, Zip and Sezzle all up large. Investors bid AMP Chairman David Murray farewell with a rise of 1% in the share price, and Fortescue Metals declared a final dividend of $1 a share, or $3 billion, which means it's yielding 9.43%, fully franked, which is 9.3% more than the actual cash rate. Now, the RBA's cash rate target is 0.25%, as you know, but actually it's about half that on the market at 0.13% because there's very little demand for overnight cash at the moment, in turn because the RBA is printing money and more or less giving it to the banks. And what's more, futures traders think the cash rate will stay at this level for at least 2 years. And if you think you haven't seen anything like this before, you'd be right. Meanwhile, Treasury said today it thought the effective unemployment rate would reach 13% by the end of the year because of the impact of Victoria's lockdown. Global markets generally rose on Friday and today, while commodities generally fell, and the Australian dollar is trading about steady at 71.8 US cents. And that's finance.
Richmond forward Tom Lynch has avoided a suspension over his latest striking offence, with the AFL Tribunal clearing him for an incident in Saturday's Dreamtime match against Essendon. The jury found Lynch not guilty of striking Bombers defender Michael Hurley, describing the hit as a simple fend-off to the chest. Lynch had been referred directly to the tribunal after being fined twice for striking in his previous against the Gold Coast. And the match review officer has handed a one-game ban to Brisbane's Lincoln McCarthy and Geelong's Luke Dalhouse for rough conduct. German football powerhouse Bayern Munich has won its 6th European Champions League title, defeating Paris Saint-Germain 1-0. After a scoreless first half in Lisbon, a former PSG star broke the deadlock with half an hour remaining.
Bayern make the breakthrough just before the hour mark, and it is Kingsley Coman.
The German team held firm late in the game to continue its unbeaten run in 2020. Bayern is now the 4th team to lift the trophy at least 6 times. Western United has qualified for the semi-finals in the club's maiden A-League season. The 1-0 victory over the Brisbane Roar was enough to help United set up a semi-final clash with Melbourne City to be played on Wednesday night. Meanwhile, Melbourne Victory has appointed former player Grant Brebner as its new head coach. We may not be able to go out at night, but that hasn't stopped Phillip Island's famous penguins from coming in, and now you can watch it live from your living room. Every year, thousands of tourists watch the penguins nightly waddle back to shore. But coronavirus restrictions mean people can't be there, so the event is marching online. Called Penguin TV, the 30-minute live stream will start at 6 o'clock every night and feature expert commentary from park rangers. The launch coincides with the penguins' breeding season, when fluffy chicks begin to fill hundreds of burrows.
Little penguins do put a smile on everyone's face, so we really wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to bring a bit of joy into people's lives.
The live stream will continue even after restrictions are lifted, and there are plans to provide commentary in different languages too. Now with the weather, here's Paul Higgins.
And Tam, after 30 to 40 millimetres of rain across Melbourne over the weekend, that suddenly got the air flowing. This is just downstream from Dights Falls in Studley Park. But more settled weather is on the way this week. Oh, we didn't see Studley Park at all, did we? We saw penguins. -8 at Falls Creek overnight and -2 at Charlton, Hopetoun and Mangalore, the coldest spots out of the mountains. A few showers again today in the south and over the northeast ranges. Cape Nelson, Mildura, Oyen and Walpia, mildest today, reaching 14 degrees. There are those showers there. 12.4 degrees in Melbourne City. That was at 1:51 p.m. Slightly warmer than it was all weekend. Our southeast was wettest today, 6 millimetres of rain at Officer. In the Silent City, it's now 9. While the southeast shivers, they've been baking in the northwest. Yesterday, West Roebuck near Broome hit 41.2 degrees. That is a new record high temperature for August anywhere in Australia. Not much going on up there on the satellite. There is cloud in a cold air mass over Victoria. Tomorrow, a high will slowly cross the state, so light winds tonight and tomorrow, which of course means chilly mornings. Later on Thursday, a front will clip southern Victoria, so Friday a few coastal showers, but generally we're in for a settled spell and warm in places by Saturday. 25 then for Mildura. Tomorrow, Sydney, Canberra, Hobart and Adelaide will be partly cloudy, blue skies for Brisbane, and in Perth mostly sunny. Back home, a shower or two overnight and tomorrow in the south, especially near the coast and in the eastern ranges, but mostly dry inland. We're in for a chilly night, -2 at Horsham and at Wangaratta. Widespread frost and patchy fog on will become a partly cloudy day, and there is a statewide frost warning. Westerlies on the bays to 15 knots, turning south to southwesterly below 10 knots in the afternoon. Strong winds on the east Gippsland coast. Well, a light shower or two still expected in Melbourne tonight and a shower or two tomorrow, mostly chilly in the afternoon and especially over our southeast. Wind up the blanket tonight, a city low of 5, 13 tomorrow. We could see fog in the morning, then a partly cloudy day. Now, that didn't work, did it? I was trying to hide that, but you're probably immediately drawn to that Saturday forecast. Before we get there, though, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday will be partly cloudy. Saturday, a sunny 21 with a fresh north wind. We could have a shower late in the day, but it doesn't last. On Sunday, a shower or two, 15, and 15 again on Monday, 10.
Thank you, Paul. That's it for this evening's bulletin. Lee Sales is up next with 7:30.